Welcome to our deep dive into JFK. You know, it's been 60 years since his death, but that fascination just never seems to fade.
It really doesn't.
We all know that image, right?
Yeah.
Young, so vibrant. JFK just held, well, so much promise. But we're going beyond the snapshot today.
Okay.
Really want to consider what was it about the man himself that still captures our imagination all these years later.
hmm
And joining us to unpack all of this is Dr. Frederick Logevall. He's a leading JFK biographer. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I think it's fair to say, I mean, it goes deeper than just the glamour, right?
I know.
Or even the tragedy.
It does.
Yeah, there's something else there.
There's something about JFK's message, what he stood for that, drew people in, and I think still does. I mean, you think about it, Dr. Logevall points out that his words, they resonated far beyond America. I mean, even in Sweden, people were deeply moved by that famous Ask Not.
It's amazing to think about, like, how certain messages can just transcend, like, cultures and time. What do you think it was about his message specifically? I mean, was it the optimism, the call to action? I mean, what was it?
It's probably a blend of a lot of things, but I think what's often overlooked is that, for JFK, this path to becoming this symbol of hope wasn't like some destiny. I mean, he had to work for it.
Okay.
And his story, it's actually full of, surprising twists and turns.
Okay, so you're saying he wasn't just born with this, like, leader aura.
No, not exactly. I mean, he was the second son, often overshadowed by his older brother, Joe Jr.
Right.
And while his family's wealth definitely, it opened some doors for sure, his early political career, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't a smooth ride at all.
Oh, really?
Dr. Logevall describes him as kind of almost an awkward campaigner early on.
Hmm.
This skinny 29-year-old guy who was still kind of figuring things out.
Wait, hold on. JFK. The man known for his charisma, and public speaking. You're saying he struggled initially.
Yeah. It's funny, right? It's not the image that comes to mind.
Not at all.
But it's a good reminder, I think, that, even someone like JFK, he had to hone his skills. He had to put in the work to become that, that polished politician that we all remember. And it makes, I think, his eventual success even more impressive.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing his wartime experience, that probably played a role, right, in this whole transformation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the story of PT-109 is a huge turning point. I mean, just imagine, so you're on this Navy patrol boat in World War II, right? In the middle of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And your boat, it gets sliced in half
Oh, my gosh.
by a Japanese destroyer.
Wow.
And you and your crew are stranded on a deserted island.
What?
And JFK, I mean, even though he was injured, he manages to get everyone to safety.
Talk about leadership, right?
Talk about leadership forged in crisis. And, Dr. Logevall, he really believes that this ordeal, it revealed, like, I don't know, these reserves of strength and resourcefulness, I think, that JFK himself maybe didn't even know he possessed.
It's incredible to think how an experience, like such a harrowing experience, can shape their sense of self and their potential.
Yeah.
And, of course, the tragedy of losing his brother, Joe Jr., in the war, that had to have been another turning point for him.
It definitely was. I mean, Joe Jr., he was kind of seen as the family's political heir apparent,
Yeah.
right? And then his death, it kind of propelled JFK into a role that maybe he wouldn't have pursued so soon otherwise.
Wow.
It's a real reminder, I think, of how personal tragedies can sometimes redirect, the course of history.
So we have this unlikely path to leadership. But clearly, I mean, JFK had some inherent strengths that kind of helped him along the way. Aside from I mean, the resilience, clearly, I mean, he developed that through hardship. But what else? I mean, what else kind of stood out?
Well, I mean, his intelligence was obvious. He was a skilled writer. He'd even published a book, before entering the Senate.
Oh, wow.
And his father's diplomatic career, I think that also exposed him to different cultures and worldviews.
Right.
Gave him kind of a global perspective that was pretty rare among American politicians at the time.
And then there's that famous Kennedy charm.
Right. But it's interesting to kind of dig a little deeper, I think, into what that actually means.
Yeah.
He was known for connecting with people on a really personal level, like showing genuine empathy, especially in his interactions with journalists.
Yeah.
But there was also this sense of mystery about him, of being set apart, which, some people have argued that made him seem more intriguing than somebody like Hubert Humphrey, who was who was maybe a bit too chummy with the press.
It makes you wonder, right? If a certain level of mystique is almost like necessary to inspire that kind of devotion,
Yeah.
is it a calculated strategy? Or is it just a genuine part of their personality?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about what qualities make certain leaders just so magnetic. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Jackie Kennedy
Sure.
and the significant role she played in shaping both his image and his success.
Absolutely. She was way more than just a fashionable first lady.
Right.
Dr. Logoval, he really emphasizes her intelligence, her sharp intelligence, and her keen understanding of people.
Yeah.
I mean, she was actively involved. Like, she was helping shape JFK's public image. She translated materials for him. She helped him prep for speeches. She offered really candid critiques. You know, they had this shared sense of humor and a love of gossip. So it suggests a connection that went way beyond just politics.
It's pretty remarkable, especially considering they had a 12-year age gap.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that probably raised quite a few eyebrows back then.
Yeah, you think?
And speaking of raising eyebrows, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. How JFK's Catholicism was a major hurdle in his political career.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. I mean, remember, this is the early 1960s.
Right.
Anti-Catholic sentiment, it was still, I mean, it was really prevalent, particularly in American politics. I mean, there was this widespread fear that JFK, as the first Catholic president, he would be, you know, beholden to the Pope.
Right.
And would somehow undermine the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
I mean, to put it in perspective, JFK's own father, he was excluded from Harvard clubs just because of his faith.
It's just crazy to think about now. And it makes JFK's that famous speech to the Houston ministers all the more significant, right?
Right. It does.
That was a defining moment.
Yeah, it was. He directly addressed those concerns.
Yeah.
Head on. I mean, reassuring voters that his loyalty, it was to the Constitution, not the Vatican.
Right.
I mean, he famously said, "I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute," you know.
Right.
And whether or not that speech single-handedly won him the 1960 election, I mean, that's still debated.
Sure.
But it certainly demonstrated his willingness, you know, to confront a sensitive issue with both courage and eloquence.
I mean, it really shows his ability to connect with people, you know, to understand their fears and then address them directly.
For sure.
It's a skill that, you know what I mean? It's a skill that a lot of politicians, even today, I think, could learn from. But let's move on to another defining, I think, aspect of his presidency, JFK's role on the world stage. He came into office during a particularly, I mean, tense time, didn't he?
Oh, he did. The Cold War was at its peak. I mean, you had tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union constantly escalating.
Right.
And here you have JFK. I mean, he's just 43 years old.
Wow.
Stepping into this role as, leader of the free world.
Right.
And he was convinced that he could navigate these incredibly treacherous waters. I mean, remember, international affairs, this had been a passion of his since he was young.
And then, of course, there's the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A major early setback.
Huge.
It's important to note that, you know, this was a plan that he inherited from the Eisenhower administration.
Right.
And, you know, JFK actually, he had his doubts about it from the start.
Really?
But as, you know, a relatively untested president, he really felt the pressure, I think, to prove himself.
Oh, yeah.
And the failed invasion, it not only strengthened Castro's grip on Cuba,
Right.
but it dealt, you know, a real blow to America's global prestige.
It's interesting, though, how he handled the aftermath. It seems like he took a different approach, than a lot of politicians would.
He did. He did something that's incredibly rare, especially in politics.
What's that?
He took full responsibility.
Wow.
No finger pointing, no excuses.
Wow.
And it's, I think, a real testament to his character. What's even more remarkable is that his approval rating actually went up after the Bay of Pigs.
Wow.
Dr. Logoval, he sees this as kind of a lesson in trusting the American people to appreciate honesty and accountability, even when it comes to admitting mistakes.
Makes you wonder if we, you know, as a society, if we still value that kind of straightforwardness in our leaders.
Yeah.
Seems like owning up to mistakes has become, increasingly rare.
It's a valid question, especially, you know, in our current political climate. But, you know, remember that JFK's actions, they unfolded against this backdrop of, immense global tension. The Bay of Pigs, it was really just a prelude to an even more critical event. the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Which, I mean, that's probably like one of the most intense moments in modern history.
It really is.
I mean, for those 13 days, the whole world was on edge,
Right.
fearing we were like right on the brink of nuclear war.
Absolutely. I mean, the stakes, they couldn't have been higher.
Right.
And the pressure on JFK, I mean, it must have been unimaginable. But what's fascinating is how he navigated those, those incredibly tense negotiations with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
His cool head, his refusal to panic ultimately helped avert a potential catastrophe.
I remember reading, I think it was, I don't know, in one of your books or something, that he relied as much on his gut instincts as he did on the advice of his advisors during those really crucial days.
That's right. He was willing to challenge the more hawkish members, I think, even of his own administration, who were really pushing for a military strike against Cuba.
Really?
I mean, there's even a story about JFK, scribbling notes during this one particularly heated meeting where he writes, "Those sons of bitches, they want to bomb everything." It shows, I think, how he really wrestled with the immense pressure of that whole situation.
Right.
But ultimately, he charted his own course.
Yeah.
He trusted his own judgment.
It's almost Shakespearean, like this clash of personalities and ideologies, right?
Yeah.
You have JFK and Khrushchev,
Yeah.
these two powerful leaders, like representing these opposing worldviews, but yet they're locked in this high-stakes battle of wills. Yet at the same time, they had to find a way to communicate, to establish some level of trust, to avoid that nuclear confrontation.
Right. And what's remarkable is that they emerged from that crisis with a newfound respect for each other and a shared commitment, I think, to easing Cold War tensions. I mean, this led to, the creation of that hotline, that direct line of communication between Washington and Moscow.
Right.
Specifically designed to prevent future misunderstandings. I think that could escalate into something really dangerous.
Right.
And they also signed, the Limited Test Ban Treaty. Right. Which was a, it was a significant step towards, nuclear disarmament.
It makes you wonder, like, what if?
Yeah.
What if JFK had lived? Could he have, built on that momentum and led to an earlier end to the Cold War?
It's one of the most, I think, intriguing what-if questions in modern history. And it's, something that Dr. Logoval, he really explores this in his book. I mean, it's impossible to know for sure, of course. But there's no doubt that JFK had this vision, for a world, I think, beyond the Cold War, a world where cooperation, not conflict, would define international relations. And he articulated this vision so beautifully in that famous peace speech at American University.
Right.
Just a few months before his assassination.
I mean, that was a really powerful speech.
It was.
He challenged Americans to rethink their whole perception of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Urging them to look beyond just the stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
Of the enemy and recognize like our shared humanity.
Exactly. And it was such a bold message,
Right.
especially coming from a president, I mean, right in the middle of the Cold War.
Right.
I mean, he spoke about peace, he said. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time.
I mean, his words, they still resonate today, don't they?
Absolutely.
It's tragic that his vision was cut short.
It is, and we're left to kind of grapple with the what ifs. How would history have unfolded differently had he served a full term or even two? These are, questions that historians and all of us, I think, will continue to ponder for generations to come.
There's this like lingering sense of unfinished business.
Yeah.
It's like a void left by his sudden absence.
Absolutely. And that sense of loss, I think it's amplified by the fact that he was such a young, vibrant figure,
Mm-hmm.
So full of promise and potential. His death wasn't just a political tragedy. It was deeply personal for millions of Americans who saw in him, I think, a reflection of their own hopes and dreams for the future.
And then there's the enduring mystery surrounding his assassination.
Yeah.
It's a wound that never seems to fully heal. I mean, we're still left with so many unanswered questions, and of course all the conspiracy theories that continue to just swirl around his death.
Right. And that's the other side of the JFK legacy, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
the assassination, it not only robbed us of a leader, but it also shattered, I think, our sense of national innocence. It introduced a level of doubt and distrust that I think lingers to this day.
It's interesting because the official narrative, right? The lone gunman theory,
Yeah,
I mean, it hasn't really satisfied everyone.
it hasn't.
It feels like a lot of people, they need to believe there's something more to the story.
They do. You know, the Warren Commission's findings, I mean, while they were, thorough, they've been subject to such intense scrutiny and debate ever since they were released. I mean, there are inconsistencies, loose ends, there are pieces of evidence that just don't seem to fit neatly into that explanation. And this has fueled, I mean, a whole almost like a cottage industry of conspiracy theories, right?
Yes.
Each with its own set of believers and detractors.
It almost seems like we, as humans, like we struggle to accept that something so momentous, so world altering could just be the result of a single seemingly random act. It
Yeah.
feels it feels easier to grasp onto a grand conspiracy,
Yeah.
a more complex narrative than to face the sheer, senselessness of it all.
It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon, isn't it?
It is.
We crave these answers. We need to make sense of the chaos, but in this case, the more we dig, the deeper the mystery seems to become.
All right.
And it's a reminder that some events, no matter how much we dissect them, they'll always, I think, retain an element of the unknown.
So where does that, where does that leave us? How do we reconcile these seemingly conflicting aspects of JFK's legacy, the hope, the inspiration that he embodied, along with the tragedy and the enduring mystery of his death?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
To hold both, the light and the shadow
Mm.
in our understanding of JFK, to acknowledge the complexities, the contradictions, the unanswered questions, to recognize that his story, like all human stories, it's ultimately a tapestry woven from threads of triumph and tragedy.
And maybe that's the most enduring lesson of his life and death. That even in the face of great challenges and unimaginable loss, the human spirit can endure. That hope can flicker,
Yeah.
even in the darkest of times.
And that perhaps in the end it's not about finding all the answers, but about embracing the mystery, continuing to ask the difficult questions and striving as JFK urged us to do, to make the world a better, more peaceful place.
It strikes me that there are some interesting parallels
Mm.
between how we remember JFK and Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, it's a comparison that comes up a lot, and for good reason,
Yeah.
Both were, I mean, charismatic presidents who challenged the status quo
Right.
and weren't afraid to push for progress, and who really articulated this powerful vision for a more just and equitable society. And
Right.
both were tragically struck down by, an assassin's bullet, leaving a nation just reeling in shock and mourning.
And those assassinations, beyond just the political implications, they left such a profound impact, I think, on the American psyche.
They did. It's not just a coincidence, that Jackie Kennedy, as she was, grappling with her own grief and trying to plan her husband's funeral, she found inspiration in Lincoln's funeral.
Hmm.
She intuitively understood the deep connection, I think, between these two men, these two fallen leaders who symbolized both, the promise and the fragility, I think, of American democracy.
There's actually a quote from Jackie about this that I find just incredibly moving. She said, I kept saying to Bobby, I've got to get this all right. Even if it's the last thing I do, I've got to get this all right. History will blame us if it's not right.
Yeah.
I mean, it speaks volumes, I think, about the weight of history,
Mm-hmm.
the burden of legacy that she just felt so acutely in that moment.
Yeah.
And in a way, she succeeded. JFK's funeral with its echoes of Lincoln's, it became this pivotal moment, this national unity, a cathartic outpouring of grief that really, I think, helped a wounded nation to begin to heal.
Mm. Yeah.
But even with those powerful rituals of mourning, the questions lingered. What if, what if JFK had lived? I mean, how would the course of history have been altered? I mean, would the Vietnam War have escalated? Would the Civil Rights Movement have achieved its goals sooner? Would the Cold War have ended differently?
These are questions that historians and political scientists, I mean, they will continue to debate for for years to come. I mean, there are no easy answers, and perhaps that's part of what keeps JFK's legacy so alive.
Right.
It invites us, I think, to engage in that counterfactual thinking. To imagine those alternative timelines, to really wrestle with the complexities of cause and effect in history.
It also challenges us, I think, to carry on his torch in a way,
Yeah.
to keep striving, right,
Yeah.
for that more perfect union that he spoke of so eloquently,
Yeah.
to work towards, a world where peace and justice prevail.
Exactly. JFK's legacy it's not just about remembering the past.
Right. It's about inspiring the future.
Yeah.
It's about each of us, I think, asking ourselves, what can we do individually and collectively to really live up to the ideals that he championed?
And for you listening, what aspects of JFK's life and legacy, I mean, what resonates most strongly with you? What lessons can we draw from his triumphs and his tragedies? And perhaps most importantly, how can we channel the spirit of his famous, ask not challenge into our own lives, into our own communities, our own world? These are questions I think that are worth reflecting on as we continue to kind of unpack, I guess, the enduring fascination with the man behind the myth, John F. Kennedy.
It's been a pleasure joining you for this deep dive. Until next time,